He is Rupert Lowe. He's the MP for Great Yarmouth, former, of course, Reform MP, now leader of his own party, Restore Britain. A very good morning to you, Rupert.
Morning, Julia. Not a party, a movement.
A movement. Oh, it's difficult to keep up, but there are so many these days. So you wait for one new party to turn up, and 3 or 4 turn up, don't they?
We are a unifying rather than a dividing force, Julia. It's very important that you understand that. I've had one journalist who's tried 3 times to understand it, but can't quite.
Well, I'm a bear of little brain. We'll see. Let's talk about how we do restore Britain in terms of our finances. Rachel Reeves has got not a £22 billion black hole, not £9.9 billion of fiscal headroom, whatever the hell that is, but now she's got a £50 billion black hole. That's according to the National Institute of Economic and Social Research. How should she fill that hole?
Well, ultimately, Julia, her problem is, along with the entire Labour Party, most of the civil service and most of the organs of the state, they seem to think that it is the state that is important and the private sector which is less important. And history teaches you the most important thing is the private sector. It's the private sector which directs investment sensibly, usually long-term investment if it can see it's going to make a return.
Yep.
And the problem she's got is that, quite apart from the fact we've all got very bored of her parroting this 20 billion black hole, maybe she's going to parrot this 50 billion black hole against herself, which she can't blame the Tories for, at least. But the point is they have this ideological view that the state is good and the private sector is bad. So what they're doing is whipping the private sector. And it's the private sector that funds everything. It's the genesis of wealth. And what they don't understand is that the more you tax the private sector, the less the private sector will pay. It's basically Lafferite economics, which teaches you that in order to grow an economy, you deregulate it, you don't regulate it. And it was an irony when she talked about regulating for growth. Well, you don't regulate for growth, you deregulate. It's
kind of the opposite. I mean, there's some regulation we need in terms of, safety and things like that. But I think most people with the view that things have got
I'm
out
afraid
of control.
I don't always agree. I think that's what the state does. It immediately, it legislates, it passes laws, it licenses, it regulates. That's how the state makes itself relevant.
No, I think there's a reason why we don't have children losing arms in, threshing machines anymore because there's some state regulation.
Julia, trust me, is now a malign force.
Well, I know, but there's a basic level of regulation that is required and is good for people. And I think most people's view, it's just got completely and utterly out of hand. Here's the thing, though.
So I think, again, look at the private schools. They put this VAT on private schools, which they said was going to effectively raise them tax. But in fact, people have now prepaid, as you've probably seen. They're now trying to close that loophole. So all that happens is the state goes from one catastrophe to another, when really what it should do is just let people innovate, let them be entrepreneurs. Because the point about an entrepreneur is there's no point in taking risk, and it's an entrepreneur that lubricates the economy.
Yeah, I get that. Here's the thing.
But if when you're successful, the state takes all the success.
Then people won't bother, or they'll go abroad. I completely understand that.
You still have to pay.
But Rupert,
you still have to pay if you get it wrong.
We're paying £110 billion a year right now, just servicing our debt, just paying the interest on our debt, let alone paying any of it off. An awful lot of voters who were demanding furlough money, demanding we carried on lockdowns. I know you weren't one of those people, but demanding that we gave people money to help with their energy costs, demanding this, demanding that. A little bit surprised that there's a bill at the end and we actually have to pay for some of that now. How do we pay for that? It's all very well saying we don't want higher taxes on business. We don't want to have so much regulation, but we also need some money. So either we need some extra tax income, or how will we get it, or we need to cut spending. What would you do if you were in her position?
Well, you have to remember that the definition of credit, Julia, is suspicion asleep. And as I've said, that is the definition of credit. And we have far too much debt now, which effectively means that other people own our debt, and we are at their behest rather than at our own.
What are we going to do about it, Rupert? I don't want to talk esoterically about it. I want to know what we're going to do about it.
Julia, there's only one thing to do, and that is to radically pursue a Thatcherite agenda of deregulation, massive cuts in the state, and ultimately, we've got to empower the private sector and reward entrepreneurs. We don't want to overtax, and you know, there's this idiot Burgon who's constantly banging on about a wealth tax.
Richard Burgon. Many Labour MPs are doing that.
A wealth tax, Julia, will just drive anybody successful now out of the country. They don't seem to understand that now global capital is very mobile. People are very mobile. There are countries like Italy and like Dubai, like Greece. I've got friends, literally this week I've had 2 friends going to Greece. They welcome successful people who are going to invigorate their economy, whereas we're actually punishing them and driving them away.
And when you talk about cutting the state,
she's getting into a vicious circle rather than a virtuous circle.
Yeah, and again, we're going to have lower tax take and more demand on the state, etc.
Correct.
What sort of cuts to the state would you be looking in terms of the big state spending? We can mess around with a bit of DEI and things like that, which we absolutely need to get rid of. I'm full Trump on that. But even Elon Musk failed to make quite the level of cuts he had promised. He did hundreds of billions, but not the trillions a lot of people had hoped in American spending.
Well, I think that was the genesis of his argument with Donald Trump.
Yeah, exactly. But
Trump didn't want to go quite as far as Elon Musk.
Exactly. What cuts?
I actually think Musk is probably right, but maybe too much.
Okay, Rupert, focus. What cuts should we be making to the state here?
Well, you have to start by cutting regulation, Julia. I mean, I spoke in Parliament just before the recess about the damage that the FCA and the PRA have done to our financial markets. London used to be the actual capital centre of certainly of Europe and arguably of the world when you had a vibrant Eurobond market and you had vast amounts of revenue.
Okay, I understand the regulation point.
Been destroyed by regulation, so
Rupert,
you could actually get rid of the FCA. You asked me a question.
No, I know, but that's okay. It's not what I was asking you about. You're talking about.
It is because
we've talked about the deregulation. No, in terms of actual, we want to generate more money. I get that. But we've also got a huge amount of government spending that has to be funded in the next few years or has to not be there. What would you cut?
You have to start by cutting government waste, Julia, and there's vast waste. America's shown that. You know, you've got huge amounts of waste. There are lots of easy wins. The problem is you've got to have the will to do it. And the problem is you've now got a government. And to give you an example, Daniel Zeichner, when I had a meeting with him about this wretched farm tax that he's put on, which I think will break the backbone of our British farms, as indeed it will our private businesses, because they put tax on businesses as well, which is a nonsense. I mean, he looked me in the eye and he said very often the state's more efficient than the private sector. Well, we all know that's palpable rubbish. So until you get some people in Parliament who actually believe in deregulation and understand the essence of economics, because none of the front bench have had any economic experience.
And this is true. I'm obviously not going to get direct answer. Let's move on to something else. I want to talk about migrants. We've got this 1 in, 1 out. In fact, it's 17 in plus all their relatives, 1 out, possibly policy from the Prime Minister's deal with Emmanuel Macron. We're paying for the whole thing. We don't know how many people it'll end up being, whether it'll last a long time, when it will actually start. I mean, abject load of nonsense. No one in our audience certainly is buying it for a nanosecond. Now we found out that human rights legislation means anyone who makes a challenge or says, "Oh no, I may have a beard and maybe balding, but I'm actually only 17, so you can't deport me." Those challenges can go on for years. What do you make of this government's attempts to deal with the illegal migration crisis?
Well, I don't trust Keir Starmer to negotiate anything, Julia. You only have to look at what he did in the Chagos Islands with all his human rights muckers like Sands and Hermer. And I have absolutely no faith in him being able to cut a good deal with Macron. Macron is, like our EU exit deal was an appalling deal because our civil service didn't believe in leaving the European Union, despite the fact that was the instruction that people gave them. So I have no faith in him cutting a good deal. I think it's rubbish, this deal he's cut. Ultimately, Macron told him what to do. What you have to do is stop rewarding illegal migrants when they land in Britain. The minute you stop that, and you only have to look at what Trump has done in America, illegal immigration is collapsing in America because people know they aren't going to be able to stay. But here, they know they're going to be able to stay. They get welcomed by Border Patrol, given a bottle of water, they chuck their phones overboard. They then go straight to the top of the waiting lists for medical treatment. I was reading about somebody getting dialysis before British taxpayers. Honestly, we are just a soft touch. And until we start to get real, I think it's just pure sort of shuffling the chairs on the deck of the Titanic.
Can I ask you,
Julia?
you mentioned about people getting medical treatment. What do you make of the plan to bring in some 300 very sick children from Gaza to be treated on the NHS, bringing their parents in? Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, admitting on the telly and radio yesterday that, yes, some of them may stay. I mean, I would suggest she's wrong. I would say all of them
I've publicly said, Julia, it's palpable nonsense. And, you know, ultimately, we've got to start prioritising the interests of British people. It will just mean that taxpayers who fund this country and who generate the growth, as you were saying just now, to try and put right what's gone wrong, which is too much statism. Ultimately, if you start bumping them down the waiting list, you're just going to encourage people to leave. Why should they fund these people who've made no contribution to Britain whatsoever? And we need to start putting the British at the top of the agenda.
Okay.
And until we do that, we will continue to be the laughing stock of the world.
Just finally, I want to ask you about comments. I've actually had a conversation off air with Nigel Farage about this and what's happened. And I said on my audience I would, when Nigel Farage appeared to agree with Vanessa Frake, his new advisor at the Reform Party, your former party, when she said she's a former prison governor, a friend of the show, brilliant, lovely lady, but she was saying she thought that there shouldn't be an automatic ban on all trans-identifying men from entering women's prisons. It should be on a case-by-case basis, depending on risk assessments. Now, seems to me to be very clear, full stop. If you're a man, you're a risk to women. You have no right in being in a women's prison. I think this is a massive issue for an awful lot of women and will actually be a deal breaker for a lot of people who might have considered voting for Nigel Farage. Where do you stand on this? Should it be on a case-by-case basis?
Well, I agree with J.K. Rowling that it appears that Reform have gone woke, Julia. I mean, on a number of issues, they appear to have gone woke, not just welfare payments, but almost every aspect of what Nigel utters now appears to be in conflict with what he said in the past. So I totally disagree. I do agree with the Supreme Court. At least now we know a woman is a woman and a man is a man.
I knew before.
You are the sex that you are effectively born with. And I'm afraid that anyone who is born or possesses a one-eyed trouser snake in his underpants is a man, and at the end of the day, should not be going into women's spaces, whether it's prisons, whether it's loos, whatever. So the Gender Recognition Act, we're very clear on that as well, needs to be repealed. I think we've all had enough of the minorities driving the way in which the majority of people live. And it's time that the silent majority stood up and basically made common sense prevail.
Okay, well, we shall see.
Ultimately what Restore Britain is all about.
Right, Rupert Lowe, MP for Great Yarmouth, the leader of Restore Britain movement. Thank you very much indeed.